I never thought a simple trip to the gym locker room would turn into something so quietly chaotic. You know that awkward moment when you're changing after a workout, trying to mind your own business, when suddenly your world tilts just a little? Yeah, it was one of those moments, except it wasn't just me out of sync, it was him, and it changed everything between us. So, let me back up a bit. I'm not exactly shy, but I'm definitely the kind of guy who values his privacy, especially in places like the gym. I go there to clear my head and, honestly, to avoid any unnecessary social drama. The gym I've been going to for the last 6 months is this cozy neighborhood spot. Nothing too fancy, but clean, with decent equipment and a pretty chill vibe. And that's where I met Nate. Nate is the kind of guy who's hard not to notice. Not because he's loud or flashy, but because there's this quiet confidence about him. He's tall, with these kind of deep brown eyes that seem to notice everything but don't stare. He works out harder than anyone else I've seen there, always the last guy on the weights, but he's also genuinely kind. We started saying hi, then small talk, and eventually just kind of fell into this comfortable rhythm where we'd bump into each other often enough to not be strangers anymore. Things changed the day we ended up in the locker room together after a particularly brutal leg day. It was late, the gym was mostly empty, and the locker room had that typical echo and hum, the perfect place for conversations to either fizzle out or unexpectedly spark. Nate and I were both changing, and I remember thinking how normal everything felt. No pressure, no weird vibes, just two guys wrapping up a workout. That's when it happened. He didn't cover up. Not in any dramatic way, but just enough to make me stop mid-motion and realize I was seeing him in a way I never had before. At first, I thought maybe he was just careless or distracted, but then I noticed a flicker of something in his eyes when he caught me looking. It wasn't embarrassment or anger. It was something else, something almost shy, but definitely intentional. I wasn't sure how to react. Part of me wanted to say something, to break the silence. Another part just wanted to pretend I hadn't noticed and get dressed as quickly as possible. But there's this weird magnetic pull in moments like that, isn't there? Like suddenly you're both standing on the edge of something that's been simmering just beneath the surface, and the only question is, who's gonna jump first? Before any of that could unfold, the locker room door creaked open, and another guy walked in, breaking whatever spell was hanging between us. Nate grabbed his shirt and pulled it back on, his face unreadable, and just like that, the moment passed. But it didn't leave me. Not at all. In fact, it left me wondering if we'd both been changing, in more ways than just the obvious, and if that night was the point where everything started to shift. I just didn't know it yet. After the guy stepped in, Nate zipped up his gym bag with this kind of calm efficiency that didn't match the weird little storm I was feeling inside. I wanted to say something, anything, to break the awkwardness, but all I could manage was a quiet, "see you tomorrow," which felt lame even as I said it. Nate gave me a nod, a small smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, and then he was out the door before I could process what was happening. I stood there for a good minute, just staring at my locker, fingers fumbling with the lock like it held some secret code I needed to crack. The whole scene kept replaying in my head. The way he didn't cover up, the way he looked when he caught me watching. It was like a crack had opened in the space between us, revealing something unspoken, and now I couldn't stop thinking about it. The next day at the gym, everything felt different. I caught myself glancing over every so often when Nate wasn't looking, trying to figure out what the hell had just happened. But he acted normal, maybe even more so, like he was trying to pretend the night before never occurred. We stuck to our usual routine, the usual polite nods and smiles, but there was this invisible tension under the surface that made my chest tighten in a way I didn't expect. After a couple of weeks, that tension didn't dissipate. If anything, it grew. Nate started hanging around the locker room a bit longer after workouts, and sometimes I'd find him waiting by the water fountain or leaning against the wall near the entrance, just waiting. One evening, after I finished my set, I saw him standing there and figured I might as well stop pretending that nothing was going on. "Hey," I said, catching his eye. "Hey," he replied, that same quiet smile playing on his lips. So, about the other night, I began, feeling my words stumble out faster than I wanted. I didn't know how to bring it up. Nate shrugged, running a hand through his hair like he was brushing off dust. Yeah, me neither. I guess I wasn't sure what you'd think. I laughed softly. Honestly, I wasn't sure what I was thinking either. He looked at me then, really looked, and it was like something clicked. Maybe we're both just changing, huh? Yeah, I said, feeling the weight of that word in a way that surprised me. Changing. Not just physically, but everything. How we saw ourselves, how we let others see us. From that night on, things started to shift between us in the slowest, most natural way possible. We began meeting up after workouts, grabbing coffee, or just sitting on a bench outside the gym, talking about everything and nothing. Nate told me about his job as a graphic designer, his love for old jazz records, and the way he always felt a little out of place in big cities. I shared my own stories, my awkward family, my messy attempts at cooking, and my secret fear of never really connecting with anyone. There was this unspoken understanding that we were both figuring things out, learning how to be ourselves around someone else. And with every conversation, every shared laugh, that awkwardness from the locker room faded a little more. One evening, after a particularly intense workout session, Nate and I found ourselves back in the locker room, alone again. This time, the air between us felt charged but less fragile. I caught him looking at me, and instead of looking away, I held his gaze. "Do you want to grab a drink?" I asked, voice barely above a whisper. He nodded, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Yeah, I'd like that." We ended up at a tiny bar down the street, the kind of place with dim lighting and vinyl records playing softly in the background. We talked until last call, sharing stories, hopes, and fears. When we finally stepped outside, the cool night air felt electric. As we walked down the empty street, Nate reached out and took my hand. It was a simple gesture, but it felt like everything. Like a promise, like a beginning. I realized then that the moment in the locker room wasn't just an accident or a slip. It was the start of us quietly shedding old skins and stepping into something new, uncertain, but maybe, just maybe, something real. Holding Nate's hand felt like the most natural thing in the world, and yet it caught me off guard in the best way. We walked a few blocks in silence, the city's quiet hum around us. Neither of us seemed in a rush to break the moment. I glanced over and caught him looking back, his eyes steady, warm. Funny how a gym locker room can be the start of something, huh? I joked, trying to lighten the mood. He chuckled. Yeah, definitely not where I expected to meet someone. Me neither, I admitted, but I'm glad it happened. We stopped outside a little 24-hour diner that was still buzzing softly with late-night regulars. Nate tugged my hand gently toward the entrance. Coffee? He asked. Absolutely, I said. We slid into a booth, the red vinyl creaking beneath us. The waitress came over with a tired smile, and we ordered black coffee. Nothing fancy. For a while, we just sipped, trading glances that said more than words could. Finally, Nate spoke. I don't usually do this. Meet people like this. It's easier to keep things simple. What's simpler? I asked. He fiddled with the sugar packet in front of him, pretending I'm not looking for something or someone. I guess I've gotten used to being invisible. That hit me harder than I expected. Invisible? I echoed. Yeah. He looked at me, eyes honest. Like showing up, doing my thing, then disappearing without anyone really knowing me. I nodded, feeling my own walls crumble a bit. I get that. I've spent a lot of time waiting for things to just happen. Like I thought if I kept my head down, people wouldn't see the mess underneath. But maybe being seen is what we need. Nate smiled, a little shy but genuine. Maybe. We spent the next hour talking about all the things that got lost in the noise of everyday life. Broken relationships, small victories, the awkwardness of trying to be vulnerable. When we finally left, the air was cooler, the streets quieter, but the connection between us felt warmer, closer. Over the next few weeks, our routines slowly blended into something neither of us expected. Sometimes we'd run into each other at the gym, but more often we'd text or call to check in, plan dinners, or just share dumb memes. The gym was still the backdrop, but now it felt like the setting for the start of something that stretched beyond the racks and mirrors. One afternoon, Nate invited me over to his place. I was nervous. What do you even bring when you're not sure if this is just friends or the beginning of more? I settled on a bottle of wine and a nervous smile. His apartment was small but cozy, walls lined with books and framed prints from local artists. It smelled faintly of coffee and something woodsy. After fumbling in the kitchen, Nate poured us glasses of wine and sat down on the couch. "You look nervous," he teased. "Maybe a little," I admitted. "First time at your place." He laughed soft and easy. "Don't be. You're safe here." That simple line did more than I expected. It was like an invitation, an unspoken promise. We talked for hours about music, our families, past mistakes, and hopes we barely dared to admit out loud. There was a moment when the conversation quieted, just the two of us caught in that fragile space between friendship and something deeper. Nate reached out, brushing a stray hair from my forehead. "I want to be honest with you," he said. "I'm scared. Scared because it's rare to find someone who makes you feel seen, and even rarer to hope it lasts." I felt my heart race. I'm scared too, but maybe scared is good. It means it matters. His smile was soft, full of something I wanted to hold on to. "Yeah, it does." That night, as I walked home under the streetlights, I realized we were both changing in ways we never planned. It wasn't just about the gym, or chance encounters, or awkward locker room moments. It was about opening up, risking vulnerability, and maybe finding something real in the process. But as much as I wanted to believe this was the start of something steady, I couldn't shake this tiny voice whispering caution. Change is messy. People are complicated. And sometimes, even when you want to be seen, you're not ready for all the parts that come with it. Still, for the first time in a long time, I was willing to find out, not just who Nate was, but who I could be with him. A few days after that night at Nate's, I found myself pacing outside the gym, waiting for him like some nervous teenager. We'd agreed to meet up before our usual workout, but my stomach was doing backflips. There was this weight hanging in the air, unspoken but palpable. When Nate showed up, he looked the same, casual, relaxed, but I knew there was something different behind his eyes, like he'd been wrestling with his own thoughts, just like me. We started our warm-up routine without much talking, the familiar clank of weights filling the space between us. Then, halfway through, Nate paused, wiping sweat from his brow. "Hey," he said, voice a little uneven. "Can I say something? Something kinda awkward?" "Go for it," I answered, trying to sound braver than I felt. He took a breath. "Remember that night in the locker room? When I didn't cover up?" I nodded, heart suddenly racing. I wasn't just careless. I guess I wanted to see what would happen if I let my guard down. And well, I was hoping you'd see me, not just the surface, but all the messy parts too. I swallowed hard. "I saw you, Nate, every part." And honestly, it scared me, because it made me realize I wanted to be more than just the guy from the gym. I wanted to know you. A slow smile spread across his face, relief and hope mixing in his eyes. That's exactly how I feel. Suddenly, the room felt smaller, more intimate. The weight of words lifted, replaced by something fragile but real. After our workout, instead of heading home, we grabbed smoothies at a nearby cafe. The conversation flowed easier now, like the dam had broken. He told me about his childhood, the struggles with acceptance, the loneliness he'd carried for years. I shared bits of my own past, the failed relationships, the times I'd felt invisible in my own life. At one point, Nate reached across the table, his hand brushing mine lightly. The touch sent a jolt through me. "Do you think we're rushing this?" I asked, suddenly self-conscious. He shook his head. "No. I think we're finally moving forward. Together." That word, together, felt heavy with promise. Over the next few weeks, our relationship grew in quiet, steady ways. We started spending weekends exploring the city, discovering tiny bookshops, late-night taco stands, and dive bars with live music. Nate introduced me to his favorite jazz records, and I showed him my attempts at cooking, which mostly ended in burnt toast but plenty of laughter. One rainy afternoon, we were curled up on his couch, the sound of raindrops tapping against the window. Nate was sketching quietly, the pencil moving fluidly over paper. "What are you drawing?" I asked, peeking over his shoulder. He smiled without looking up. "You," I laughed, a little embarrassed. "Really? I'm not that interesting." He looked up, eyes soft. "You are to me." That simple confession hung in the air, sweet and unguarded. But as much as things felt right, I couldn't ignore the nagging doubt creeping in. Nate was guarded about certain things. His phone buzzed with messages he never showed me. He sometimes disappeared for hours without explanation. I wanted to trust him completely, but part of me worried there were walls he wasn't ready to bring me through. One night, after a particularly tense silence during dinner, I finally asked, "Nate, is there something you're not telling me?" He looked down, fingers tracing the rim of his glass. "I'm sorry if I've been distant. It's not you. It's just complicated. Can I help? I want to be part of it, not just standing outside." He sighed, eyes meeting mine. "I want that too, but some things take time." I nodded, trying to be patient. Love wasn't supposed to be easy, right? That night, as I lay in my bed, I realized that change wasn't just about opening up and finding connection. It was about learning to navigate the messy, uncertain parts together. And maybe, just maybe, that was where the real love lived. In the in-between, the not quite perfect, the slowly unfolding story that was ours. I didn't have all the answers, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid to ask the questions. A couple of days after that conversation, Nate invited me to join him at this little art show happening in a converted warehouse down near the river. He was into graphic design, as I mentioned, but this was different. More underground, raw, the kind of place where the walls themselves seemed to breathe stories. I was excited to see a side of him I hadn't met yet, even if part of me was nervous about what I might find. When I got there, Nate was already waiting. He looked different somehow. Not the confident, put-together guy from the gym or the cozy apartment, but someone quieter, maybe a little vulnerable. His hands were tucked into the pockets of his jacket, and he kept glancing around like he wasn't quite sure he belonged. "Hey," I said, sliding my hand into his. He gave me a small smile, the kind that tries to hide something but doesn't quite succeed. "Thanks for coming," he nodded. We wandered through the gallery, walls covered in everything from jagged, chaotic street art to haunting portraits. Nate pointed out a few pieces that spoke to him, explaining the stories behind the artists, the techniques. But every now and then, he'd drift off, his eyes distant. Finally, near this huge canvas splattered with layers of black and crimson, he stopped and looked at me. "There's something I want to show you." He led me through a side door into a smaller room, dimly lit. In the corner was a collection of his own work, sketches, digital prints, all raw and intensely personal. I'd never seen this side of Nate before. There were images that felt almost painful. Fractured faces, tangled figures, shadows chasing light. "This is incredible," I said softly, my voice catching. He shrugged, a little embarrassed. "I don't usually share this stuff. It's kind of my way of dealing with things I don't talk about." I reached out and touched one of the prints, a silhouette of a man standing alone in a storm. "It's like you're telling me things without words." Nate's eyes met mine, a mixture of relief and fear. "Exactly. Sometimes I'm better at showing than saying." We sat down on a bench in that quiet room, the tension between us thick but not uncomfortable. I realized that this was a turning point, not just for Nate, but for us. The walls he'd been building weren't there to shut me out anymore. They were invitations to understand. On the walk back to his place, the night air cool and crisp, Nate was quieter than usual. I could tell he was wrestling with something. "Hey," I said, stopping so we could face each other. "You don't have to carry everything alone, you know." He looked at me, and for a moment, I thought he might open up completely. Then he shook his head, a sad, tired smile on his lips. "I want to. I'm just scared of what it would mean if I don't do it right." "Right or wrong, you don't have to figure it all out at once," he sighed, leaning into me. "Thanks for being patient with me." I wrapped my arm around his shoulders, pulling him close. "Always." Things felt like they were finally settling into a rhythm, but life as usual had other plans. About a week later, Nate was late meeting me at the gym. I waited by the lockers, checking my phone every few minutes, that familiar knot of worry creeping in. When he finally showed up, he looked exhausted, like he'd been carrying the weight of the world. I pulled him aside. "Hey, what's going on?" He hesitated, then confessed. "I've been dealing with some stuff at work. Stress, deadlines, and, well, some personal stuff resurfaced. Want to talk about it?" He shook his head. "Not yet. Just needed some space." I hated the way that felt, like I was close to him but couldn't reach in. But I respected it. "Okay, just know I'm here when you're ready." Over the next few days, Nate became a bit of a ghost. Texts were short, or sometimes didn't come at all. I felt myself spiraling, questioning if I had pushed too hard, if the walls were closing back in. One evening, unable to hold it anymore, I showed up at his apartment unannounced. When he opened the door, his eyes were red-rimmed, and the lines on his face deeper than I'd ever seen. Without a word, he pulled me inside and closed the door gently behind us. We sat on the couch, the silence stretching until Nate finally whispered, "I'm sorry for shutting you out. I don't always know how to handle it." I reached for his hand. "You don't have to be perfect. Just be you." He looked at me, that guarded expression softening. "That means a lot." We spent the night talking, really talking, about fears, doubts, and the messiness of trying to build something real. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't pretty. But it was honest. As dawn crept through the blinds, I realized that love wasn't about flawless moments or easy answers. It was about standing together in the uncertainty, choosing each other over and over, even when everything else felt shaky. And with Nate by my side, I was ready to face whatever came next. The morning light filtered through the blinds, casting thin stripes across Nate's cluttered living room. We were still sitting on the couch, exhausted but somehow lighter. I traced my fingers over his hand, feeling that familiar mix of comfort and something new, a thread linking two uncertain people trying to figure it out together. Over breakfast, Nate opened up a little more than usual. "I've been thinking," he said, stirring his coffee absent-mindedly, "about how much I've kept to myself, even with you. It's like I'm scared if I share too much, it might push you away." I looked at him, seeing the vulnerability beneath his guarded exterior. "I'm not going anywhere. And I want to be there for the messy parts, not just the easy ones." He smiled, a genuine one this time. "Messy parts, huh? Yeah, I probably make a habit of those." "Welcome to the club," I joked, feeling the tension ease a little. That day, as we went about our routines, I found myself thinking about how much Nate had become a part of my life. The gym, the late-night talks, the art shows. It was like all these pieces were weaving together into something bigger than either of us had expected. But with that came this quiet fear. What if the walls he'd started to let down weren't strong enough to keep the storms out? A few days later, we planned a weekend getaway, a short trip to a cabin Nate's family owns just outside the city. Nature was supposed to be a break from the noise, a place to just be. I was hopeful, but also anxious about how real this was getting. The drive out was easy, with us chatting about everything and nothing, a playlist of old jazz and indie tunes filling the car. When we arrived, the cabin was small but charming, surrounded by pine trees and the kind of quiet that feels almost sacred. That first evening, after unpacking, we sat outside on the porch with mugs of hot chocolate, watching the stars blink to life. Nate reached over and tangled his fingers with mine. "Thanks for coming with me," he said softly. "Thanks for inviting me," I replied. "I like this. Us." He sighed contentedly. "Me too." But as the night deepened, the quiet seemed to invite things we hadn't said yet. Sitting there under the vast sky, I realized there were still parts of Nate's past and present he hadn't shared, the secrets lurking behind his silences. The next morning, after a slow breakfast, Nate suggested we go for a hike. The trail wound through thick forest, the air crisp and alive with birdsong. As we walked, Nate's hand found mine again, squeezing gently. "Can I tell you something?" he asked, hesitating. "Always." He took a deep breath. "There was a time, a few years ago, when I thought I'd never be able to trust anyone. I got hurt pretty badly. Someone close to me betrayed that trust. It's why I'm so guarded now. I don't want to lose that part of myself again." I stopped walking and turned to face him. "Thank you for telling me. That kind of pain, it leaves scars. But it's not who you are. It's part of your story, and I want to be in the next chapter." Nate's eyes glistened, and for a moment, the tough exterior cracked just enough to show how much this meant. We kept walking, the forest around us a quiet witness to this fragile honesty. Back at the cabin that evening, we cooked dinner together, mostly me burning things and Nate rescuing the mess with his better skills, and shared stories from childhood, dreams for the future, the kind of talks that build bridges. But as the weekend came to a close, reality crept back in. The city, the jobs, the pressures that waited beyond the pine trees. We both knew those challenges weren't going away. On the car ride home, silence settled between us, heavier this time. I finally broke it. "Nate, whatever this is between us, it's real. But I'm scared, not just of losing you, but of everything else that might get in the way." He looked over at me, his hand finding mine again. "Me too. But maybe that's what makes it worth the risk." We squeezed hands, two imperfect people holding on, ready to face whatever came next together. That night, lying in bed, I thought about how far we'd come, from that awkward locker room moment to this, a quiet promise of something real. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't easy, but it was ours. And for the first time in a long time, that felt enough. A few weeks after that weekend at the cabin, Nate and I settled into a rhythm that felt more like us. Messy, imperfect, but steady. The kind of relationship that doesn't need fireworks every day, just the quiet comfort of knowing someone's there. We still had our moments of doubt and silence, but they didn't feel like walls anymore. More like pauses, spaces where trust could grow. One evening, we were back at the gym, finishing our workout. Walking into the locker room, I caught Nate's eye in the mirror. No awkwardness this time, just a look that said, "We're in this together." As we changed, he caught me watching and grinned. Then, without overthinking it, he reached out and squeezed my hand. That small gesture said everything. It was the kind of thing that doesn't need words. A silent promise that whatever changes came next, we'd face them side by side. Later that night, we cooked dinner at my place. Nothing fancy, just pasta and a bottle of wine. We laughed over my burnt attempts at sauce, teased each other about dumb mistakes, and shared stories about our hopes and fears, honestly and without pretense. It felt like home. After dinner, Nate leaned back, looking at me with those deep eyes I'd come to know so well. "You know," he said softly, "I never thought I'd find someone who could see me, all of me, and still stick around." I smiled, feeling my chest tighten. "I think we're both better for it, for letting ourselves be seen." He reached across the table and took my hand again. "Here's to changing together, mess and all." I laughed. A warm, genuine sound. Yeah, together. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought back to that awkward moment in the locker room when everything shifted unexpectedly. Who would have guessed that a small, unguarded slip could lead to this? To finding someone who challenged me, supported me, and quietly became the person I didn't realize I was waiting for. Love, I realized, wasn't about perfect moments or grand declarations. It was about the courage to be vulnerable, the patience to understand, and the simple choice to keep showing up. And with Nate, I was ready to keep changing, together.